than usual, but that's because there was a bunch of stuff going on yesterday with Artifact that really delayed me. You can kind of see some of my videos other than this one if you want to check that out, but I'll leave that aside. Happy to get around to this now because this is actually a really sweet game that I just got to watch, and I'm looking forward to analyzing with you. And this is between EndoZoa and SecondBlue. EndoZoa is on the TJP control list that you see right here. This is a pretty standard list from most accounts. Nothing particularly new here. If you looked at something like the Cranky Panda list, which is kind of the archetype, there's just a couple of particular card choices. Like there's a card swap in the market that it's dropping the Moon Dial and the Scorpion Wasp, instead playing the Find the Way and Equivocate in the Panda version. So not that crazy of a list here, which is fine. I mean, I talked about this in the last podcast that I did, that you don't really need to be reinventing the wheel with every deck that you make. So this is a perfectly fine standard deck that I think that everyone should be aware of, and I don't think there's very much to draw attention to, but the composition of this one for the purposes of our match that we're going to be talking about. But yeah, so this is the TJP control side of the matchup. So let's spend some time instead talking about the Feln deck. So this is the Feln Aggro deck, or the Scream style deck that SecondBlue played in this matchup. I'm actually a pretty big fan of SecondBlue's play with this deck specifically. I've seen him play it a couple of times and find some really good lines where other people maybe didn't, and does it really quickly too. So definitely knows the deck very obviously backwards and forwards. This particular game, I'm just spoiling it right now a little bit. He does win kind of easily in it, but there's a really interesting decision in the game. It's really what I want to focus on and talk about of what was attract my interest about this game. But just composition of the deck, really clean, a lot of Nightfall, heavy threats. I really like the inclusion of the Darkstalkers. This was a card that not everybody was picking up on initially when it came out. The composition of the market, which does matter in the course of this. We have Gift of Battle, Permafrost, Unstable Form, Haunting Scream, and Rindra. A little bit threat-like compared to what I would like personally. It's okay with it. I personally am not a huge fan of the Unstable Form, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I would. I'm not sure what I would want in that slot. I have to play with it a little bit more. But it's definitely, that's always a card that I'm just like, I don't know. Feels like a hedge to me against something else that I'm not interested in hedging against. But anyway, with this build of the deck, very aggressive, not fooling around with a third faction, focused on getting your opponent dead. So, good stuff. So with that, let's get into the game. So this is game 3 of EndoZoa versus SecondBlue. I think this is round 6 of the ETS event that happened this weekend. Of course, this is brought to you in part by the RNG Eternal team, which of course cast you to that particular tournament. And thank you, of course, for letting me use this footage. But yes, now we are getting into the third game. As I mentioned in the deck tech, this is a bad matchup for the TJP deck for a lot of different reasons. That they don't have a lot of fast speed interaction, and that's something that you really want against any Haunting Scream style of deck. One choice that was made on the first turn by EndoZoa that might end up costing them a little bit is playing that Primal Influence out on the first turn, meaning they don't have access to the Marshal on the second turn if that's something they wanted in order to trade with a Yeti like this one. Well, there's only the one drop in the deck, so you could kind of say, like, yeah, maybe you just got unlucky, but this is a leak nonetheless, I believe, because I don't think there's any reason really that you had to play the Primal on turn 1. You could have played it on turn 2, and especially if you want to build up to that Hailstorm, and there's a lot of more options there. But that's a minor point. But anyway, right now, EndoZoa is actually making a choice about whether or not to keep an Unseal on top. Unseal, surprisingly good in this matchup. This might feel at base as like a control versus aggro style of matchup. The issue is that with Unseal is that it's actually really good at countering cards like the Haunting Scream, really good at countering Rapid Shot. These are really powerful cards when you can especially hit them at the important junctures. So it makes sense to want to keep that, even though it might be an unintuitive keep in this particular archetypal matchup. But anyway, we do get the Desert Marshal trading with the 2-1 Yeti in this situation. I'm not crazy about this, given how powerful the Desert Marshal has the potential to be in this matchup. Right now, we see, of course, the Darkstalker that's out, which is a great card to silence. with that 2/1 body, and you, I think, have the opportunity to just hold off for another turn, see if your opponent plays out something like a merchant, and then you can get fuller value out of maybe trade with the merchant next turn and silence the Aegis off of the 2/1. I'm not sure there. I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts are. Now, this particular juncture is one that we're going to talk about at the end. Again, this run through of the actual games, as you see, they're going pretty quickly. You can't go too in depth about all the strategy that's happening here, but this particular decision I think is really interesting, so I am going to spend some more time on this later on. But just for the purposes of what's going on right now, we have options like the Haunting the Scream, the Gifted Battle, Rindra is another one that could come at this situation. So those are some of the ones, but they ended up going for the Haunting Scream in this particular matchup, which is interesting. We do get the Arcana out of the Vital Arcana out of EndoZoa, which helps to rebuy the health that you would be losing on this turn. So while it's a passive play in some respects, it's in some ways it feels like a time walk effect, getting that extra turn just and drawing a couple of cards. So that's nice and under not a ton of pressure yet. So back to EndoZoa, we have some difficult choices here about what to use effectively, and the ends up going for the Hailstorm, which I'm not a huge fan of, just out of power usage considerations. Personally, it doesn't take any damage off the battlefield. I mean, neither would take any damage off the battlefield per se. I guess that there's some potential the damage that's taken off the battlefield with the Harsh Rule, but just using that up properly feels like it has a better application, a better chance of working out for you in the long run, because especially next turn you have a lot more options available to you since you get that Harsh Rule out of your hand. Do just have Second Blue being patient, not deploying too much, just getting a little damage in here and there, forcing your opponents to chew through the Aegis effects, and going to get another very passive turn out of EndoZoa, hoping that that's good enough and holding up the Unseal. This is problematic, though, because any Nightfall effect really kills you, I think. Basically, well, not necessarily kills you, but just sets you so far behind and deals so much damage. I really feel as if EndoZoa was playing with fire for it, just kind of hoping that Second Blue just never draws a effect that gives Night. And so there's a lot of ways for that to go wrong. Does get punished here, of course. Goes down to 8. Does unseal the Cabal Tactics, which is useful for actually surviving the turn. Now, I'm not crazy about, though, because it seems as if there's a pretty good chance that your opponent does have access to the Haunting Scream, and that you kind of would want to have access to the Unseal for that, and taking that extra 4 damage wouldn't have killed you. And while this really does kill you in most situations, because especially you can get access to the market again, and that will ensure that your opponent has access to the Gift of Battle. We do get some more type play here of pulling out the Gift of Battle from the market, being able to use all these cards very efficiently, using the Rapid Shot to get the maximum damage, sequencing things properly, timing things properly to ensure there's no way for EndoZoa to disrupt this combo, especially with something like a Scorpion Wasp that technically could come down and mess this up in some capacity. I don't think there's any way around it, but very well played by Second Blue. He did make the top 8, but did not end up winning the whole event, which is, of course, that happens, but it's still a strong performance nonetheless. But with that, this is, of course, a lethal setup, so let's return back to that market turn and talk about what was going on there, as I think it was quite interesting. There's a lot of different possibilities of where to go from that position, and this is a hard deck to play, too, and use the market with maximum efficiency. So the rest of this video is really just going to be going deep into this one decision that's related to the market. And actually pull it up here for the purposes that you can take a look at what the contents of the market are, even though there's not a lot of options that are actually particularly interesting and possible to even consider in this position. But I think that this decision is really weird, and I don't understand why Second Blue chose the Haunting Scream, and so chose it pretty quickly too, and seemed pretty confidently. Maybe this was just a mistake, but I kind of want to talk about all the different possibilities because it's interesting in terms of its implications for the matchup. So, to begin with, the two options that are obviously off the table of what to get from the market are Unstable Form and Permafrost. This is a matchup in which your opponent does not play very much in the way of units, and the 2 units that they do end up playing are, one of them is vulnerable to Annihilate, and you're going to have a spare one of those. Doesn't look like they have it anyway, because they would have played it last turn, probably. So that's, those 2 are very obviously off the table. Gift the Battle is a nice tool to have access to, but you kind of want to have that after you already have a threat, one that's been activated by the Haunting Scream especially. So not something that you're desperate to have access to for the time, especially given the fact that you have kind of a threat-light hand. So the 2 options then that are the most reasonable are Haunting Scream and Rindra. I think the default choice that most people would pick in this setup is Rindra. You play out the Merchant, you play out your depleted power, set up for a turn 5 Rindra attack in with your 4/4 and your 3/3 and threaten basically lethal the following turn. And that seems to be a really logical, obvious choice to me. And I don't understand why Second Blue instead went for the Haunting Scream. So I mean, like, one way or another, you do know that you're going to be getting rid of one of these Annihilates parts, so that's not even that big of a decision. So it all comes down to, are you getting the Haunting Scream or are you getting the Rindra? And what are the considerations that go along with each? So Rindra, the big downside is that it plays into Harsh Rule. You know that your opponent is moving into Harsh Rule, influence and power. They haven't been doing a whole lot over the course of these last few turns. I mean, they've played, like, a Seek Power and a Desert Marshals, so their hand has to be full of something. So, which is the 2 most likely cards that you're going to have to fight through is going to be the Vital Arcanus and the Harsh Rules. I mean, obviously there might be some finisher cards in there, in which case you probably win no matter what you get. But the 2 things that you're going to worry about is maybe there's a combination also of a bunch of Hailstorms, is a possibility too, because you haven't presenting too many threats there. But of all of this conversation, the one that makes the most sense to be concerned about is Harsh Rule. Playing out the Merchant and then playing out a Rindra on the following turn really sets up for that Harsh Rule. That position seems bad, but it's also the most obvious way to get that extra damage out of your 4/4. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's also just a wonderful card to have access to in the composition of this hand. Even if that ends up happening, you can imagine that there's the possibility of setting up another Haunting Scream down the line on the Rindra. Like, take this example. This is what I actually think is probably the correct play. You get the Rindra in this position, you play out you have the 3/2 on the board, so you have 4/4, 3/2, and then you play out 5/5. And then you deal 7 damage on the following turn. Get your opponent down to 11, hypothetically. Your opponent then Harsh Rules, so you're left only with the 3/2 and you have a 4/4 or 0/4 technically, and the 5/5 in your Void. But they're powered down now. If you then Haunting Scream back the Rindra in that situation, you deal 6 because of the 5 plus the 1 damage from the Nightfall trigger. They're at 2 left over after that turn. This is of course assuming that you don't get an extra power to turn on your standards, which actually would set up lethal under that situation. If they actually do somehow engineer a kill on the 3/2 as well, then instead of Haunting Scream back the 3/2, the 5/5, you do it on the 3/2, and then that will buy you back the other Haunting Scream you can use on the Rindra, which sets up a really clean lethal under a lot of different situations, assuming you get any extra damage in whatsoever. So I think that there's a lot more possibilities there. If you have access to that Rindra, it's just so much damage that you have access to when you pair it with the Haunting Scream. And because you already have a Haunting Scream in hand, it doesn't feel like you're actually counting out that many different options, because you can always rebuy the Merchant again in the future. Now, it does feel like there are things that can go wrong here. Don't get me wrong. I think that if the exact sequence of cards that you see out of EndoZoa here, of the Vital Arcana to buy some extra time, that burn style plan isn't quite as good, but it also doesn't feel as if you're costing that much in the value plan, given the ability to Haunting Scream back the merchant to get back the haunting scream that you would have gotten at this point anyway. So I'm not sure. This just feels like you're cutting off some options to yourself. I think that Rindra was just better, but I could be wrong. So be sure to share your thoughts. I really would be interested to see if there's anything that I'm missing of a particular card that maybe I wasn't considering properly to play around under these different situations. But it just feels to me that there's very little lost as opposed to getting the Rindra over the haunting scream, but maybe I'm missing something. Anyway, that's it for today. Be sure to check out the other things that are going on at a+space Games and find me on social media. You can find all of those links below. I love all of you very much, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, guys.